Since 1995, over 26,000 international students from all walks of life join the British investigators' training courses in anomalous phenomena within ufology, paranormal and supernatural, parapsychological study, anomalous phenomena, science, hypnotherapy, spiritualism, astrology, astronomy, cryptozoology, and many other areas. Our certified self-study courses will teach you how to assess, analyze, engage, formulate, document, and be cognizant of all types of phenomena, suitable for light workers and starseeds, curious personalities and inquisitive minds, skeptics alike and truth seekers. For more information, please visit www.stellaruniversity.com.
Well, I saw my first flying saucer when I was 4 and a half. Didn't know what it was. My mother would take me to town to visit a friend of hers who lived in an old Victorian house, and she had rented a room. It was a boarding house. And she lived upstairs in the back overlooking an alleyway. So we went up there, knocked on the door. They started yakking, and they said to me, you know, go in the room, be a good boy, don't do nothing bad. And they left, went to the parlor to talk, because that's what the rules were. So as soon as they left, I saw a back open window on the room. So I went up to the window, and I said, oh boy, a chance to look out of the second story. I'd never done that before. So I hoisted myself up onto the windowsill, and I was balancing myself out the window, checking out what the world was like from the second story. About that time, I saw something out on my vision to the left, and I looked down to see what it was, and it was the damnedest thing. Turned out to be a disc. It was about 15 feet across. I can tell you now, then I wouldn't have been, you know, I can remember it. And it was flying edge on, just coasting down the alleyway, doing about a brisk walk with a person, about that speed. And the disc itself was rotating slowly, like about this, slowly. And it had a dome on it, but the dome wasn't rotating. And as it got real close to me, I got a very good look at it. It was as close as the front seat here in the front row, about that distance, maybe a little closer. And it was up at my elevation. It also needed a good washing. I thought to myself, they should wash this, whatever it is. It was all dingy and dirty. And it didn't make any noise. And it had this funny hazy glow around the edge of it. It was like a grayness in the air. It stood off about a foot off the edge, all the way out into maybe a foot or two into the disc itself. And it just went on by slowly, and I watched it go away, and it went out the alley, and that was that. And I didn't think any more of it. You know, when you're 4 and a half, everything's new. And I was from the country, lived on a ranch. This was in the big town of Merced I was in, you know. It's just something, you know, they have in Merced. Well, fast forward now about 3 years, and I'm now in a movie theater watching the RKO newsreel on Saturday before I get to watch the cartoons and Rocket Man or whatever else they were showing. And that particular day, in the RKO newsreel, they had a piece on the UFOs that were in Washington, D.C. They were hovering over the Capitol building. They stayed there all that weekend. And in this newsreel, they interviewed a Navy admiral and an Air Force general. And the reporter goes up to the admiral and says, what do you think they are? And he says, they do not show up on our radar. And that's all he'll say. So then he goes to the Air Force general and says, what do you think they are? And he says, with a big shit grin on his face, he says, our radar is working fine and we see them. And that's all he'll say. You know, he's sticking it to the other service. And the reporter can't get anything more out of these two guys. But the cameraman's panning back up, showing you the objects, and going back down to the Capitol building in the background with the general and the admiral in the foreground. And that was the end of that piece, and they wanted to the next part. And I'm thinking, oh, that's what I saw in the alleyway. It's those guys. Well, they stayed there all that weekend, made national news. It was talked about in the radio. Eventually, the president had to come out and talk about it. Yes, we know they're there. We know what they are. But that's all he'd say. Truman. And then they flew out of town, and then they flew back in the next weekend and stayed 2 more days, and then they flew out of town and didn't come back officially anymore. That's when I think we made the treaty agreement with them. They coerced us into it, you know. You will recognize us. You know, we're going to stay up here. Anyway, disclosure's already happened, but frankly, the population wanted to deny it, stick their heads in the sand, they moved on. So anyway, I've had all kinds of experiences in my life with UFO phenomenon. I've also had what I call associated experiences. It's nothing like I'm watching The Craft, but I have things happen to me distorting my reality. It's real to me, but I know it's not real in the sense it's not regular reality. I'll try to explain. One day I was going to the mountains to try to talk to some people who had sighted a UFO near a town called Coulterville up in the Sierras in Central California. And I was about 2/3 or better of the way there, and it was in the August of '67. And I was coming down this long mountain grade into this flatness across the upper part of this little valley. And a really very large meadow, small valley, depends how you want to define things. And as I got down to the end of the grade and got into the flats, I noticed there was something out to my right across this little valley. And it was two identical objects that were the shape of footballs, ellipsoids, metallic looking, silver shiny. And they were orbiting each other's center of mass, and they were doing it over this big oak tree on the other side and the edge of this little valley. And I went, wow, that's them. You know, right there, that's them. And I got goose flesh and kept recycling the word wow. So I slowed my motorcycle way down, and I just kind of putted down this straight line road till the road made a right angle turn going the other way, and they were over that way. So at my closest approach, I was just about 1/8 of a mile from them. So we're real close, and I'm getting quite a good look at them. So I pull off the road there, and I take off my helmet, and I'm staring at these guys, and I'm thinking, wow, these are the guys I got questions for them. You know, I want to know where you're from, how you run your world, what's your power supply, what's the ships, how do you do it, you know, how do you break the light barrier? I had lots and lots of questions. And hey, there they are, go ask them. So I decided that's what I would do. I was going to drive over and talk with them if they would come down and land. Well, I knew this road very well because I went to the mountains all the time on my motorcycle having fun, you know. Anyway, right there where that road makes the turn, there's a dirt road that goes off, and about within 100 feet or so, it goes up to a fence, barbed wire fence that has a break in it where there's a cattle guard. Keep the cattle from, you know, going out, but you can drive under the dirt road. Drive over, it makes a right angle turn, goes right down the fence line to where they're at. And I said, well, I'll just drive down that road, park there, and walk out in the field and say, come on, you know, land, let's talk. Well, I went to do that, and to my amazement, I couldn't find the road. The road was gone, but I know the road's there, but the road's gone. But I know the road's there, but the road's gone, you know. I know there's a cattle guard, but there's no cattle guard. There's a continuous fence, there's dead grass, there's no road. I'm going, does not compute. Then I talk to myself, I say, self, you must be really excited about this, and you're somehow misremembering. It must be just a little further down the road than you're remembering. You know, you tell yourself something, or they tell you something to think. So I go down the road just a little bit, go up over a little rise and drop down. There's a turn out there, and I turn out, and I stop there, and I have this conversation with myself. I won't bore you with all the details. But it boiled down to is this. I realized they really didn't want to talk to me that day. So I continued on to Coulterville. Now I'm happy to report on my return trip, the road was back, and so was the cattle guard, but the UFO guys were not. So I learned really clearly at that point they had the power to override my reality totally. I could not tell the difference between a dirt road and a patch of grass. I mean, they just gave me something to believe and think, and that's what I saw. And, you know, I knew there was a road. I knew there was a cattle guard. I knew all this, but where is it? You going to believe your lion eyes or what? Well, there's other things that I came to realize over time that they had been doing to me over the years. I like to read lots of technical stuff. My background is I'm a physicist, and I like physics stuff. So naturally I go off and read physics books. I read articles and technical stuff. And I like, my real passion is I just like a good technical problem to solve. You know, everybody's got their thing they like to do in life. For me, I like to solve technical problems. Yay! Okay, so I'll read something that looks interesting to me. And I'll go, wow, that's surprising, you know. I would have thought I would have heard about that before. Because that's really something what I'm reading here. You know, the calculations are there, and I'm going through the whole thing. Going, wow. And I put it down and go on about my business. Maybe a month later, a year later, 10 years later or something, I go, oh yeah, I read about what I'm trying to work on right now, and it's in that It's in that book over there. It's in that article. And I go grab it, and it's not there. Or the critical part I want that I remember is not there. Okay? Like I remember it was 1961-ish, Scientific American. There was a nice article on strange galaxies. And it was quite a good article, technical stuff about how there's these galaxies out there that show evidence for a massive explosion in the galactic cores that just blows the center guts out of the galaxies. And synchrotron radiation signatures show that 10,000 GeV, 10,000 billion volt electrons are coming out of the core. Holy crap, you know. I mean, we're talking quite an explosion in the core of those galaxies. You don't want to be there. And so I'm reading all this. Well, that part of the article is still there. But the other part, a couple, 3 pages, are missing. The one when I read it the first time. The one I read showed that black holes don't exist. And showed that supermassive stars do exist and that they're unstable. They go up to maybe 3 or 4 billion solar masses and they detonate. They're really compact, but they're not black holes. Matter can't go to the black hole state. Before it can get there, it detonates. That was in the article. Now, you can't find that article anywhere. It's my lying eyes again, right? But that's what I believe now, and I think the scientific community is now coming around to it. There's a real problem with the black hole theory. Just like there's a big problem with the Big Bang theory, you know. There's problems, there's always problems. Now, tonight what I'm going to try to do here is mix some of my experiences that I've had in my life with UFOs, specific sightings and things that I've experienced, along with trying to explain what we've all been seeing over as a collective group of humanity now for a couple, 3, 4, 5,000 years on the planet. If you can believe the drawings on the rocks out in the desert that's going on for quite some time. You go out in the weird middle of nowhere and there were some ancient Indian tribe lived. And you start looking at the drawings and you say, you know, I'd swear that looks like a guy in a spacesuit. You know, and you're going, maybe, yeah, maybe it is. All right. Now, maybe that looks like a UFO, doesn't it? Well, yeah, maybe. Anyway, we've all been experiencing these people for the longest time, and they've been keeping a low profile for the longest time. Now, what I want to try to do is take a little bit of technology and mix it with the experiences people have been having so you can see these strange things you're seeing are not that strange. They're actually very explainable by standard physics once you recalibrate yourself how to see how things are done. Now, I know most of you are not very mathematical and whatnot, so you're not going to be tortured with equations. I'm going to try to keep this very visual, and you don't have to... What you try to do is try to just look at it, relax, pretend you're stoned or something, and just let it flow into your mind, and just remember the flow, and see if you can feel it. You know, can you feel it? So, let's... Here's some definitions and assumptions I'm going with. This is real for me, and this is what I'm speaking from. I have no tolerance for all those skeptic people that want you to prove everything to the last iota to their satisfaction. That's a waste of time. So this is what I hold to be true as I talk to you tonight. My definitions and assumptions. UFOs, any physical objects, aircraft, manned and controlled by beings from other star systems. The Earth is being visited by dozens of extraterrestrial civilizations on a regular basis. The range of spiritual and technological development of these visitors varies from a few thousand years to a few billion years. There's a real continuum here. And I'll show you one of the reasons why that is. UFO propulsion systems. These have effects and consequences we can see and experience. Some seem to use high-intensity static and oscillating magnetic fields. Others also use high-frequency electric fields and microwave fields. And I'm missing a slide. I can see that now. I'm missing... Something's wrong. You know what's wrong? Something's wrong. I don't know. There should be a diagram here and it's missing. Let me go back the other way. How embarrassing. Okay, you're going to use your imagination now. I'm going to tell you something, and I can't figure out how this flash drive doesn't have this diagram anymore. Yes, may I have my lithium, please? Anyway, I was going to show you a diagram, which I went to a great deal of trouble to draw, and what it is of the Milky Way galaxy, which is a spiral arm galaxy. You've seen pictures of galaxies before, and they have this swelling hub on the bottom and the top, and it's a flat disk if you look on an edge on. And if you look at it from the top down, it's got the bulge in the center again, but you see like these spiral arms. Okay? Well, our galaxy collided gravitationally with another galaxy about 300 million years ago. This other galaxy, though, was much smaller than our galaxy, and the age of the stars on the average in those galaxies was about 4 billion years older than the stars in our galaxy. Now what that means is that most of the stars in this older, smaller galaxy were in the white dwarf state. That means they had like the mass of our sun, but they had now shrunken down to the size of the Earth. So you have these little white hot stars, but at great distances you can't see them because they're so small, even though they're bright locally, but they're not at great distances. Well, as this other galaxy collided with ours, as it was spinning on its way in towards the collision, a gravitational collision, stars don't really hit each other. The spaces between the stars are so vast that they very seldom ever collide. I mean, rupture one another, but that's about it. So this little guy was deformed by the gravity fields and converted into a stream of stars that went through our galaxy, came back out, and looped around into a ring pattern, a disk, like a hula hoop. So our galaxy now, the Milky Way, sits inside of a ring galaxy. And the star systems there, like I say, are like 4+ billion years older than the average stars here. And there's very truly ancient civilizations on the solar systems in that galaxy. And they come and go from here all the time at will. They can fly from their ring galaxy into our galaxy, visit, do what they want, and go back in the same evening. I mean, these guys know how to haul. They can cross our entire galaxy and back in a couple hours. And that's if they're not really in a hurry. Okay? If they want to go to the next galaxy over in Andromeda, no big deal. In the bigger ships, they can go way out there. Okay. So we're visited by those guys. But now in our own galaxy, we have this continuum of development from civilizations that are a few thousand years ahead of us to those that are a few million, and maybe some that are a billion or two ahead of us in our own galaxy. So there's this continuum there. And so there's no monolith about it. They seem to have some sort of agreement amongst themselves, all these aliens, how there's something like rules of manners and conduct about visiting various worlds. And I don't know how the system is really ran, but that's my impression. Now, since I'm missing, I have the suspicion we somehow have the same lecture, but not the modifications added to this lecture, so this may get funny. I have another flash drive. We don't know. We'll go and we'll be surprised. Okay, where was I? I'm going to go back to the beginning. Let's see. Yes, I already mentioned that. Here's a circle. That represents our object flying through the sky. And down here, there's the observer, that little point down there. That's my eyeball looking at this thing going by in a straight line. Now, if this object moves over 16 of those angles, that alpha, in my vision per second, I can't see this guy. Why? Because I'm like you. I'm a very slow, dull creature. That's the way it is. I can't get around it. You know, my eye mechanism takes a picture about every 16th of a second. So if it moves over 16 angular dimensions per second in my vision, it goes into the blur, into the invisibility range. So if you're a UFO guy and you're traveling around at high speed, several hundred miles an hour, I think all of us have seen jets that are up near, traveling 500 or 600 miles an hour, fighters, and they come flying through the countryside where you're at. If you happen to track with them and you catch them, you can just keep up with them. But if not, if you see them coming through, by the time you try to lock on them, they're gone. You'll hear the engines, but you don't see them. So the UFOs are the same way, except they're traveling a bit faster. They may be traveling like Mach 2, Mach 3, Mach 10, and just at 1,000 feet or two, traveling over you. Bing! You don't know they're here, and they don't make shock waves because they've solved the shock wave problem, which we'll get to. So that's one of the things that's going on around us all the time, but we're oblivious to it. Now, if you've got a camera, though, the cameras nowadays, they're fast, and some of the film cameras are still, they're fast, hundredths of a second, even a thousandth of a second. So you can be out taking a high-speed film picture, and you don't see the thing, but when you develop the film, it's in the film. I remember many years ago, I saw a guy's home video. He got himself a home motion picture camera. He goes out to the airport, and this is long ago because he was photographing, I think it was a 4-engine big passenger propeller plane, so we're talking the 50s. He's got his little home movie camera, and he's doing a movie of this plane coming in, and it's a nice movie and all that stuff, but the neat thing is that when the guy gets home and he develops it and looks at it, he goes, what? Behind the airplane is a flying saucer, one of the Adamski types, with the hemispherical looking things on the bottom. And this thing is doing this behind the plane, following it all the way in. But it's going so fast, he can't see it, the guy. But the camera frame is so short, click much faster than his eyeballs can see. He catches it at click, 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 click. And this thing is also putting out a lot of ultraviolet apparently, so it shows up nice and clearly in his photograph. So he photographs unknowingly at the time a motion picture of a UFO following an airplane into a landing at a major international airport. So anyway, they can be around you all the time doing all kinds of stuff, and you'll be clueless. Because like I say, we're really slow, dull creatures. If it happens quicker than a 16th of a second, we don't have much chance of paying attention to it consciously. Visible plasma cloud caused by intense microwave pulses, caused by high frequency and high intensity oscillating electric fields, or both. And there's others too, but this is what we'll put down here. Here's an example for you. Many years ago, back in the 60s, there was one of those Air Force counterintelligence aircraft things. And they fly around doing whatever counterintelligence electronic aircraft do. I think it was basically something the size of a KC-40, it was a fair-sized 4-engine big jet plane with a bunch of guys with electronic equipment aboard. And as the aliens would have it, they decide to encounter this Air Force aircraft. And they're nice enough to travel only a few hundred miles an hour so that our guy can follow them around for about an hour and monitor the electronic emissions from it as they go here and there, and we're following them and we're recording all the transmissions from this thing. And it's a round sphere, maybe about 40 or 50 feet in diameter. It's an orange type glowing ball, which a lot of which have been reported, I think, recently just back on the East Coast and a few other places in this last month. That sort of UFO. Anyway, this is the emission patterns that they were picking up with their equipment aboard the ship. The horizontal line is the time axis, and these little vertical blips represent, and I've expanded one of them down there. Each of those little vertical blips represents a microwave energy burst being emitted by the object. Burst, burst, burst. How many bursts? Well, 600 a second. Okay? That's a lot of bursting. And it's only 2/millionths of a second wide of burst energy. Burst, 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 burst. Now, at the frequency of 3,000 megacycles, that's 3 gigahertz in other words, 3 billion cycles a second of microwave, being bursted out for 2/millionths of a second, 600 times a second. Now, here's the puncher. The instantaneous power level of these bursts was 2 gigawatts. I mean, this babies can put out power. You talk about an energy supply. So every little burst is a really, really intense microwave. You talk about your microwave. Nah, this is the guy to cook anything you got. So now, why would you do such an insane thing, right? Well, why you would do it is you want to make a plasma cloud around your funny ball, and you want to know why the ball is glowing. Well, if you put enough power in anything, it'll glow. Down here, my cartoon shows a bunch of positive and negative particles, and I've scattered a few dots in there to represent neutral particles. And that's called the plasma. Now, if you have something like a plasma on the outside the hull of your ship, you don't actually have to have it there. You can make your own real quick with these power levels. but you could have something like that outside your ship. And if, let's say that line there represents the hull of your ship, and that funny signal there represents that's a signal generator to the hull of your ship. I'm not going to go into technical details of how you build such things. You just travel with me on this. And here's the beginning of our plasma. Here would be right there at the edge. Well, if I went in and I put the type of power levels that I was just talking about, these power bursts in, each time one of those power bursts is put out to the hull, a plasma cloud explodes off the hull, an ionization wave. It may go out for 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 feet, depending on how much power I put into it. Now I got this ionized gas all around the ship. Isn't that wonderful? Anyway, it's great for whatever. What they're going to use it for is, well, imagine if I had a method to be able to grab on to each of the positive and negative particles, both positive and negative. I had a way, once I created this plasma exploding thing, that I could then grab all of those charged particles and get them to go all in one direction together. Okay? Now all the neutral guys, non-ionized, what would happen to them? No, they'd go the same way. Why? Because all the ionized guys are going that way and they're hitting them. Imagine yourself in a something like a giant parade ground, and you know, several thousands of people, right? And let's say every 1 in 10 of them, for some insane reason, decides to go due north and go due north now at speed. What's going to happen to everybody else in that crowd? They're going to go due north too, because they get tired of being pelted by all the crazies. I'm going to run with them, you know. Anyway, in this our situation, what happens is this. Okay, here's a diagram. What does it all mean? Well, you'll notice that there's these vertical arrows, right? See them? Parallel to each other. 1, 2. I got 4 shown here. Now that is symbolic of a thing called an electric field going that way. Whatever that means, it's going that way. Now you see the circles with the X's in them? That's a symbolic of a magnetic field. And you see how it's all the little circles and whatnot are evenly spaced, and the whole thing is uniform? That's symbolic of a magnetic field going that way. Now, without trying to explain to you any definitions of electric and magnetic fields, which they make you do in physics, they torture you with it actually, just know that they exist. There's a magnetic field going that way, and there's an electric field going that way, and that's how it is. Okay. Now, if I place some poor innocent charged particle, be it a negative particle up there on the top or a positive particle down here in the bottom, their path that they will follow are these little half circle guys called cyclonic motion. Tip, 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 tip. But they all go that way, see? Tip, 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 tip. That way. So I have a method here of taking that plasma cloud I created with that giant microwave burst into the air that's now full of positive and negative particles. If I can impress this type of electric and a magnetic field onto that cloud, I can make the entire cloud go that way. Now that's very handy for you. Now I'll tell you experience. I was visiting with my friend PJ. Hi. And this was back in mid-80s. And I left her place, and it was late in the afternoon, not quite dark. The sun was behind the local hill, but not dark. And I'm walking up her big long driveway to the street, and a voice in my head says to me, "Look up." And I look up, and what I see is a flying saucer, about maybe, I'll guess for you, 500 feet up, if that. Maybe a 30-foot or so diameter disc. And it's traveling that way. And not only is it traveling that way, I can see it making the plasma cloud. It shows as a big arcing glow, sort of a whitish glow out in front of the ship. And it's going as fast as I can see it. I think they probably were doing it slow for my benefit, because they knew it. Seriously, they like me to know things. So, because why? Because I'll write about them and talk about them. It's controlled input to the society. So I look up and I see the plasma cloud, plasma cloud, plasma cloud, plasma cloud, and the saucer just chasing its own plasma cloud. Okay? And that's what it's doing. It's making a plasma cloud, grabbing it, moving, using the recoil off of that to go forward. So it just went smoothly by. I watched it leave, and it wasn't there long. I mean, it was hauling pretty well, cruising at maybe 200-300 miles an hour. So that's it. But I got to see plus as it left. So that's a personal example of what I've experienced there. And you see, all these experiences I've had with them have forced me to do my physics point of view, because it was a series of sightings I had in the year of 1967, one of which I told you earlier about the two ellipsoidal things orbiting each other's center of mass out over the meadows and whatnot. It was that and some other sightings I had that year that sort of drove me over the edge and made me say, I've got to work on this as a physics problem and explain all these things that are reported that these UFOs are doing. So I set out to do that starting in 1967, and it took me about 10 years to around 76, 77, before I felt confident that I had qualitatively, with some mathematics, had solved many of the mysteries. Not all, let's say the least, but I had made a real nice, improvement, shall we say. Now, here you'll notice those little dashed lines in there, the outline you can just make out of my flying saucer. And then you'll notice these big circle cross-section cuts on the ends inside the hull. Well, that's symbolic of a giant ring, a current-carrying ring. Let's assume it's superconducting. I started and it just goes and goes and goes. Okay, then if that's true, then these other curved lines that go out, now I have them stop here by regular symbology, they go out all the way around and come back in again. These are magnetic field lines. So a current-carrying ring generates a magnetic field. Okay? And that's the long and short of this one. And by the way, you can also see there's a little V there, and that's telling me that my ring that's inside of my saucer is heading that way. Okay? So what I really have here, in essence, is this. A ring going that way. Now, it turns out that ring has a magnetic field. So the circle with the arrow coming out of it, the circle part represents the magnetic field. Like before we had the uniform circles with the X's in it representing the magnetic field. Well, now I'm using circles with a dot in it to represent the magnetic field. But you'll notice that the spacing of the circles and whatnot is not quite uniform, but it's close enough. So, and the arrow represents the electric field. I'm just saying to you, what am I saying to you? It turns out there's an equation. I don't know if I put it on this slide or not. I don't want to torture you with equations, but, the big but. Uh-oh. What have I done? Oh, I'm going the wrong way. That's what I've done. Just a minute. Okay, there's this equation here. It says E equals V cross B. V stands for velocity. This X, it doesn't mean times here. It means cross product. It's a vector product of another vector called the magnetic field. And why is it there? That's just one of the little equations you run into when you work with magnetic fields and that are moving. Whenever a magnetic field moves, you not only experience the magnetic field itself, you also experience an electric field at right angles to that magnetic field that's generated by the motion of the field, and the value of that electric field is given by this equation. So the point of the story is this. Once you have a magnetic field, you have a magnetic field. But if you start moving relative to the magnetic field, or if the magnetic field moves relative to you, you also now have at the same time an electric field. And guess what? They're at right angles to each other, just like it was in the slide, remember? Electric field this way, magnetic field that way. And when you do that, all the charged particles in the field go that way. Okay? So,
somebody open and go full screen again? Full screen.
What is that?
If you just crank it down to...
Oh no, I hit the wrong button. Okay, there's two more buttons I don't know what they do. Hold on, I'll try one. Famous last words. Is that better? That's full screen, right? Hey, okay. Now I'll go back where I was, maybe. Okay, now I've done it. Okay. It's a new toy for me. And I got the wrong kind of the wrong lecture on here too, I might add. But hey, who's paying attention? Okay, we're getting closer. It's going to happen. All right. So here we are. So here's our ring, and here's our magnetic field, and the arrows mean the electric field at right angles. So again, long story short, moving ring through the atmosphere. If it encounters a plasma cloud, what does it do? It grabs it and throws it past itself and keeps on going. So, and there's some other subtleties, which I think I'm about to mention on the next slide. No, I guess I'm not. Okay, I thought I had the compression slide. Okay, more typical effects. UV radiation, sunburn from plasma cloud, electrical systems in cars and aircraft go haywire and stop, but strictly mechanical diesel engines are not disrupted at all. Neat, huh? Okay, let's see, I'll just discuss that. When you make a plasma cloud like that, you're not only making ions. What you've done is you've stripped electrons off of atoms and molecules. And at some point, those electrons are going to go back into those atoms. And when they do, quite often, when they go back in, they emit ultraviolet radiation, visible radiation, and infrared radiation. Okay? So these massive ionization waves from these microwaves also produce an intense ultraviolet light burst. And so if you're close enough, and they're doing it 600 times a second, and you're around long enough, you get a sunburn relatively quickly. Actually, in some cases, quite severe in certain ships when they're getting ready to sort of warp out of here. Now, electrical systems on cars. Now, again, we have this is that current carrying loop idea. So all I've left here in the loop is the cross-sectional cut of the loop, so that represents the current carrying ring. And again, I've drawn the magnetic field lines to represent the idea that any current carrying ring produces this field out in space around itself we call a magnetic field. Well, on flying saucers, there's a lot of evidence to indicate that instead of like the field we have in this room right now from our Earth is around a half a Gauss. Pretty weak. It's significant, but pretty weak. But on these ships and these rings on these 30, 40-foot saucers, they seem to have no trouble producing 1 million Gauss. Some 10 million Gauss. I mean, we're talking still, manly fields. So when you can do that, now this here is a schematic of what a car spark coil is. See the parallel vertical lines over there? That represents iron core. See the primary winding little squirrelies? That represents you putting a bunch of wire around that coil. And then there's the secondary winding, it's winded into it. That's a whole bunch more windings, much larger, 1,000 times more, and much finer wire. That's all built inside of that little thing you call your spark coil in your car. And here's how it works. You put a current into the primary winding for just a little bit till it reaches some little value, and you hold at that value for a little bit. And that current in the primary generates a magnetic field. That magnetic field polarizes the iron core of the transformer, okay, to a certain value. And then what do? You immediately shut off the current in the primary, and that then causes a depolarization wave of magnetization in the iron core. Well, that affects the secondary and generates a very high voltage spike. That's the spark that detonates in your spark plug in your cylinder to light your gasoline air mixture. So that's it. It just repeats it over and over. As you go down the road, each one of those blips is that process. Okay? That's how a standard car runs on a spark coil. Now, let's say you're driving down a highway. It's late at night, deserted road. And all of a sudden, you kind of notice that the lights are dimming a little bit in your car. And then the engine starts to sputter. The engine stops. The lights go out. Power steering is failing. Your power brakes are failing too. You pull over to the side quick as you can and you stop. You go, what the? And it won't start. The lights are gone. You're going, what is this? And then you kind of sense something. And you see some strange light out in the brush off the way. And you hear a noise. And the lights come back on. It starts right up. And you get the hell out of there. Well, what happened? You had the wonderful experience of coming into the magnetic field of a flying saucer that didn't turn off the coil. And it's got a big distance around itself where the magnetic field may be 10, 20, 50,000 Gauss. Well, what happens is, particularly in plastic cars today, your spark coil isn't shielded from that field. So that magnetic field from the saucer overwhelms the polarization of the core of the spark coil. And the whole principle of how the spark coil works is it has to be polarized and then depolarized. Polarized and depolarized to get a spark. But if you've totally polarized it, you can't polarize it anymore. And if the saucer won't turn off its field, it stays polarized. So you just drove into a zone where your magnetic core gets totally polarized and can't change, and you can't get a spark anymore. That's this zone here. You've driven into this zone. This is a curve. You don't have to understand anything about it except that the spark coil is designed to work here, and you've driven into a place where it's experiencing this. Now, this here is a little tiny section of a piece of wire. This might be the piece of wire heading to one of your headlights. It might be the piece of wire heading to your starter or some other critical electronics in your vehicle, like your spark coil also. So this is a little section of wire, and I've blown it up to big size. Now, electrons go down the wire, and they kind of make a scattering, ricocheting type of pattern as they flow. Now, in a normal Earth magnetic field of half a Gauss, you don't have to worry about electron magnetic field interactions. It's an insignificant little correction term. It's there, but don't worry about it. But if you're traveling in a vehicle that's traveled into this zone of this UFO that's putting out a million Gauss field, you're in trouble, because your wire now has electrons that will start to orbit inside of the metal instead of traveling down the metal. They'll still travel, but they'll travel now in circle paths like that as opposed to ting, 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 ting. Your resistance of the wire goes way up, and if you know a little electronics and your resistance goes way up, your current carrying ability goes way down. So as you're driving into the zone, you get a brownout of your headlights. Why? Because all your wiring is getting highly resistive. And the more you get closer to that stronger field, the more resistive, the dimmer the lights get. So the lights go out, spark coil doesn't get enough power, it also gets saturated magnetically. You can't start your car because the starter's full of wire that has the same problem as your lighting wire. You're shut down. But if you've been smart enough to buy a Mercedes diesel, it's totally mechanical. Unfortunately today they're not totally, but in the old days you could get a totally mechanical diesel. I think you can some places still. Well, if you're strictly mechanical, the magnetic fields don't mess with you, because all you're doing is at the right time squirting a little bit of juice into the cylinder when it's at the right pressure, and it automatically detonates, and you just keep blasting on down the road. No electronics it's all mechanical. So that's why the diesel guys will keep going, and the gas guys with spark coils, they die when these things happen. Okay, ground heating caused by induction heating / microwave heating. Well, as I alluded to earlier, my perception is that we're being visited by a massive continuum of development spiritually and technologically of aliens. And just like we have all kinds of craft that we use for various purposes, we have short haul craft, we have heavy cargo craft, we have long voyage craft, we have all kinds of stuff. You know, you go to the little airports, you got the little Cessnas, you go to the military base, you got the big jets. There's a continuum in craft that all the aliens will bring with themselves. They'll come and go into low Earth orbit in a starship. And then they'll launch ships the size of a house. They'll go down and start traveling over the planet. Then they'll stop someplace and they'll launch a bunch of guys, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 small guys, and go off to the 4 winds routine. And this big ship will hover in that way. The other guys go out for a few hours and do what they do. then they'll come back in a rendezvous, and then all of them will head back to the mothership again. This is stuff that's been reported now for many, many years. So you don't know for sure what you're going to be running into in terms of the technology or which version of, is it a shuttlecraft or is it something designed to go between the stars? And you can have two ships that look relatively the same, where one is a starship in terms that you can go from one star to another, and the other is basically just designed to do atmospheric flight and look, close Earth orbit sort of work. It's not really designed for long haul. But they'll look pretty much the same, and they'll share some of the same engine technology, but one will probably have much better technology. Well, you have to have that to go to warp drive to get to the next star system. So here it is, Farmer Fred's place, and you'll find that quite often these guys will do recurring visits approximately every 7 years. I read, I think it was a National Enquirer story many years ago about some farmer in the Midwest, I think it was Iowa, and he reported that a flying saucer had landed on his farm, and some guys had got out, little guys, and they dug around some soil, and then they got back in the ship and they left. And I read this story, and they didn't give enough information in the sense to find the guy, except they did give his name and the part of the state he was in. And I thought, this is pretty rural. If I trek for a little bit, I'll bet you I can figure it out. Anyway, long story short, I located this guy, and I called him up and said, is the story true? You know, or was it invented in a newsroom? And he said, no. They came and interviewed me, but he said it's kind of strange. They didn't report most of the stuff I told them. I said, oh? He said, yeah. He said, that wasn't the only time it's happened. They come back about every 7 years. And not only at my place, at my neighbor's place. You know? And they do the same thing every time. They come outside, they take soil samples, get back on the ship, and leave. You know, it's like they're seeing how bad it's getting over time. It's a data point placed. Okay? I climbed a hill one time after I'd heard a sighting and to a data point place and saw the landing gear marks and stuff on the top of the hill where the guy told me the thing had landed. Anyway, when they do that, sometimes maybe they don't do things according to the book, or there's something else going on. You never know. But if you can imagine that you not only have the superconducting ring in there for the very intense magnetic field, turns out you also need a oscillating magnetic field to do some of the things that you have to do to fly these things. Now, these are very strong oscillating magnetic fields, but whenever you have a really strong oscillating magnetic field, you also get induced electric currents. Induction heating. Somebody here, you might be, well, I think they make some stoves now. Don't they have stoves that take your frying pan and they heat it by induction heating? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, I've seen them myself, so it's common. Well, the same thing happens where a saucer lands if he's got an oscillating magnetic field. Just jack it up a few orders of magnitude. He's gotten power levels to use. Instead of your electric stove, he's doing it over the size of 30 or 40 feet diameter, maybe 100 times the power level. So he comes down and lands for just a little bit. When he leaves the bake zone. Induction heating. And this may go down 2 or 3 feet in the ground. And be hard as like concrete. You can also get this type of effect if the guy left his microwave system on. You know, sometimes, you know, crap happens in the universe, and you're flying along your saucer, and the maintenance computer says, you know, problem in sector 452. Hey, Louis, let's land, you know. And Louis in there, he's down in that little part of the craft there, and he's looking for module 876J, and it's burned out. So he's swapping and rewiring and reprogramming. And while they're doing that, they left the microwave on. You know, they were too busy trying to land without crashing. So everything's fine now, and they leave you the ring too. Okay. You just never know for sure why it comes from, but there's very good explanations for a lot of this stuff. Physiological effects. Well, a lot of people have had close encounters with UFOs, particularly off of highways. That's quite common. They'll be driving along, and a UFO will be flying along nearby or taking off near the highway or something of that nature. And people will feel tingling sensations. Yeah. Or they'll feel burning sensations. You know, it's basically tingling taken to a new level. And then there's strange humming noises. Well, you know, some of your nerve system's being overdriven by microwaves and things like that. You know, bursts like the 600 pulses per second at 3 gigahertz. Well, that's the sort of thing that can override a nerve system, make you hear 600 cycle sound. A buzz, you know, humming noise. Paralysis. Well, all your nerves in your body are, they're conductive. They have not only the regular firing system, they also have outer sheaths that hold them, which are real rich in a material called triple-stranded protein collagen. And it's an N-type semiconductor. And so if you're inside an oscillating magnetic field that's oscillating, let's say it's several hundred cycles a second, and your outer sheaths of all your nerves are electrically conducted because they all have this collagen in them, then you can expect to see some voltages induced across your nerve tracts everywhere. Okay? And if it's strong enough, it'll make you go twitch, twitch, twitch. If it's going at a high enough frequency rate, it'll not just make you twitch, it will paralyze you, because every muscle gets turned on, and every muscle's got a counter muscle. You know, to do this, I have to have muscles doing both ways. Every motion has to have at least two muscles to take it back to where you came from. So if I turn on all the muscles at one time because I stimulated all the nerves at one time, I have paralysis. Well, yeah, that's not good. I haven't heard anybody report they've died, but then again, you know what I mean? We just found him on the highway. Poor guy had a bad heart, apparently. Okay. Supersonic speeds with no shock wave, no sonic booms. How a shock wave is produced: force field method of supersonic speed, plasma cloud compression method, accelerated time flow rate method. Yeah. Okay. Let's get into it. All right, here's my little cartoon drawing of a fighter jet, or maybe it's a stealth fighter, I can't tell at this distance. And it's traveling along making a shock wave. And I've used the standard graphical methods of showing how the shock wave front, the side wing lines, are formed by the expanding speed of sound sort of shock wave stuff. But here's the key point for the diagram. You never get a shock wave unless the difference in velocity, or I should say the closing velocity between the ship's front nose and the medium is at the speed of sound or greater. That's the key. You always have to have that differential. The leading edge in the front of the thing traveling through the medium has to have a relative velocity to the medium that's at the speed of sound or larger than the speed of sound for the shock wave to generate. Otherwise, no shock wave gets generated. Now, shock waves are really unwanted things. They're very wasteful in energy. They're very loud. And if you're relatively close to the ground and you're traveling, let's say, Mach 15, your shock waves will tear up trees out of the ground. You know, I'll tell you a joke. This is a real story. A cousin of mine was an air traffic controller in Thailand during the Vietnam War. And he was at a base that serviced the SR-71s that flew out of Japan on reconnaissance missions over China, North Vietnam, and then they'd land in Thailand, do some little R&R resting, refuel, and do it back the other way. So he's in the control tower, and one of the SR-71s is coming out of North Vietnam, heading towards Thailand, and they call in, you know, and they give you your speed, altitude, and ETA, you know, estimated time of arrival. So he asks him, what's your ETA and all that stuff? And the pilot replies back, speed 1750. That's a bit above the speed of sound. 1,750 miles an hour. Elevation 250 feet. What's your ETA? Oh, 30 seconds or so. He was joking with him, but they're going, what? Anyway, they had fun. These guys are crazies. He was a little bit higher, but the speed was right. Okay, now what you've got here is this funny looking box. And inside the box, you'll see my saucer. And you see these bunch of parallel lines, and you notice that in the center of the saucer they're real close together, and as you go out either way they get further apart. What this is symbolic of is a compression of the air. Where the lines are closest, that's high compression of the air, high density and high pressure. As you go out to the edge, it gets weaker and weaker until finally there's no more lines. That means we're back at atmospheric density and pressure. Now I'm going to postulate right now, without explaining it, that there's a field that you can generate from the ship that can do this. And there is. It's called gravity. I'm hoping if this slide has it, but I'm a suspicion. I don't know what happened. Wrong flash drive, what can I tell you? I was going to show you how to make gravity, as they say. But let's assume there's this mysterious field, we'll call it gravity, that makes this force field around your ship. Now furthermore, let us assume inside your ship you got some type of other engine, we'll call it a non-action reaction engine. In other words, you don't have to throw things out the back to go forward. You have an engine that lets you go whoop that way with no exhaust. And so that powers this thing, and the gravity field maintains this density envelope thing around you. Well, as this thing travels through the air, the speed and the density around the UFO go as that top graft. So you see, way out at the edge, that's atmospheric, density. And let's see, where is that one here? Yeah, air still flow. Yeah, and as you go into the envelope, it gets denser and denser, and then gets less dense, and you're back. This airspeed relative to the UFO is highest out there at the edge, and as you go into the envelope, it gets less and less and less. And time you get to the ship, it's down at and below the speed of sound, and then goes back up again. Well, here's the key point. As long as I've got no place in there where the differential between one thing and the other is higher than the speed of sound, there's no shock wave. So by the time the air that came in from the front reaches the hole, it's subsonic. There's no shock wave. And the relative speed of the air inside the packet to the other is also keeps it subsonic, the relative closing speed. So this type of thing, you can travel through the atmosphere and there's no shock wave made. Very handy to have. That allows them to do what they do right now. They fly into San Jose late at night or in the afternoon if they want to come in uncloaking. They come in here at speed, stop on a dime, beam up who they want, do what they want, then leave. And you're never the wiser. You don't hear them, you don't see them. Did you see something, Harriet? No, I heard something. Okay. Oh, that was a good one. No, I can talk about how you pick them up out of the bed, but get through the wall. No, I have not solved that one. But remember, some of these guys are a billion years out on us. So in the billion years, the scientists can come up with some pretty good chicks, you know. I want to talk to you about quantum synchronization of gravity. Yeah, right. Okay, here's some consequences of the sort of thing I had in that last graph. There's our density envelope again. You see, that's that first little rectangle-ish area there. And there's our saucer, obviously. Now, you see that first dashed vertical line? Well, that air entering this gravity packet field, whatever we want to call it, it's getting denser and denser as it works its way through. That not only means that the air molecules are being compressed together, the water molecules are too. And when you get the water molecules compressed enough together, they stick together. They like each other. They're very dipole. They love to accumulate and stick together. That's why water is so freaky. Well, at that dash line, I'm saying that's the place where there's enough water so it makes little droplets and whatnot and starts to begin to freeze. At some point in the envelope, that's the second dash line, I'm declaring that has grown to the point where it's now forming these little tiny itty-bitty ice crystals. And at that point, we now see the light scattered from the sun off of it, and that's a contrail coming out behind the UFO. Now, this sort of stuff has been photographed. I don't know if any of you have ever seen UFOs with a contrail behind them. This is the process. So it's not a chemtrail. It's a real contrail. Okay. Now, Yeah, we definitely have the wrong, I just do not know what happened. I apologize to myself and to you. There's stuff you're not going to get to see today after all. Okay. Hey, you know about these things. Come on up. You noticed something I missed. So you know, yeah, you know, I think you're on to it. I thought we were listening to our flash drive in the back, but maybe it's a very similar flash drive that was made from that one.
Could this be it?
Yeah, let's try that one. What does it say?
The flash drive was in there.
Well,
Pulled out.
no, it's.
Okay, let's connect it.
Okay.
Is it Einstein?
No, it's the same lecture except we modified it. So looking for one that has almost the same title. Yeah, I'll be under Gary. Well, then we'll just have to go back where we got.
Well, that's not a problem because it's there. Is this it? UFO Phenomenon 2013 working properly?
Yeah, that would be it. Okay, yeah. Hey, we think we found it.
Okay, let me do something.
We'll see shortly. I'll take a drink of water while I'm waiting. Gary, 20 minutes. 20 minutes left? Is that what you said? Okay, then I better haul. How much? You want to do 25? No. Okay, I'm confident here
Was
too.
this the...
Yeah, that's it. They're the same. Keep going. Keep going. Yeah. Keep going. Keep going. One more. No, it's the same one.
It is?
That's the same one. Okay, let's just leave it there. I'll just carry on from here. Sorry, we did not find it. Okay, where was that? Okay, let's see. That was. Okay, there we are. What? Okay, we just did that one. Quiet. There we go. Now, here we are. Now, oh, I've done it again.
No, on the computer, just push the pad one time.
Thank you. Well, you should see what I can do with this finger. Okay. Here we have a flying saucer, and I have two arrows coming out of it. They're symbolic of velocities. The longer arrow, labeled VG, going from the edge of the hull out to the tip, that represents the velocity that, let's say, a ground observer observes the ship moving on his radar by vision. The smaller arrow represents the velocity as measured by the instruments aboard the ship. Now that may sound crazy, and it is if you don't know how to control the rate of time flow. But if you can control the rate of time flow so that you can project out around the ship a different time flow rate, you can travel the same distance but effectively in a much longer time. Actually, you're faster, but from out here, how to put this? Velocity is equal to distance per time. Okay? So aboard let's see, I think I got this backwards actually. But anyway, what you have is the ground observer sees you moving at one speed, And you aboard the ship think you're moving at another speed. Why? Because you're in accelerated time flow. And it only took you just a smidge of the time by your clocks to do the same distance. Yeah, I got that backwards. Yeah, it's got to go the other way. Anyway, the idea is that velocities can be different for different observers if you can control the rate of time flow. Sharp right angle turns at high velocities without being smeared or killed. Why it seems impossible. Accelerated time flow rate solution. How to speed up and slow down time flow. Experiments to test this hypothesis. Some consequences of accelerated time flow. Okay. This is something that I saw myself along with my friend Joe Franco back in that summer of '67. We went out to look at UFOs, and we found one. It found us. And it flew over us and did these 6 right angle turns and then disappeared as a streak of light in our vision right after it gave us a telepathic message that it was going to do exactly that, and then it did it. But the thing I got the slide here for is you can see these right angle turns. Now, if you're driving along, let's say at several hundred miles an hour, and you just suddenly do a right angle turn, and with our standard technology, you're dead. I mean, you just smeared in the wall. You're goo, right? So how can you do a thing like that? They're obviously doing it, and they're doing it at much higher speeds than we observed. On radar, they've seen these suckers traveling 5,000 miles an hour and make a right angle turn within 100 feet. I mean, you're dead, right? Well, it turns out if you actually do a mathematical analysis of it all, which I did, you can explain how to do that. Here's your turn. And your normal predicted magnitude of acceleration is the velocity you're at squared divided by the radius of the curvature. And here's a standard example. You're doing 1,000 feet per second, which is basically almost speed of sound. And you, let's say, use a 500 foot radius of curvature. You calculate it out with it turns out to be 103 Earth G's. You're not going to make it, you know. But they're going much, much more than this. Here's another example. This is a true right angle turn. And here you have first infinite radius, and then there's this area where you start the turning, and then you go to a constant radius, and you start turning back to a straight line. So if you plot that acceleration of that path by that equation, you get a curve that looks like that. This is you're just starting your turn, then you're staying in your constant radius of your turn, and then you're going back to your straight line again. Well, obviously, that is a heck of a diversion in accelerations, and if you have some type of equipment to compensate, if it makes one mistake, you're dead. So you've got to come up with something that's foolproof. Here's what it is, I think. Can't prove it to you. This is how I figured it out, how they had to be doing it. In regular physics, if you take 2 poles, a north pole and face it against another north pole, and you bring them up close together and they're both the same strength of north, regular physics says there's no magnetic field there because it's a vector field and one's going this way, one's going that way. They cancel each other because they're equal strength, as I just told you. So in between the poles, there's no magnetic field. And if I was to do a south pole and a south pole, does the same thing. That's what standard physics as we know it now tells us. I believe standard physics has made a mistake. I think we have to think about another type of field that's not really the magnetic we know and love, but it's a neutral scalar magnetic. You know, give it a name you like. Anyway, the idea is this. I believe that the combination of north-north or south-south accelerate the time flow when you've got this condition of 2 opposing fields. That in that field area, where they're opposing each other, time does not flow the same. And I believe it's a very non-linear effect. Probably goes to the square of the field strength. So what this means, if I'm right, in your flying saucer, if you can build a very strong magnetic field coming out of the floor heading, you know, that way, and an equally strong one going that way, so that they neutralize each other by the standard definition that there's no magnetic field there, there's no magnetic field, but your time flow rate's different. And you can accelerate up to several hundred times normal flying time flow rate. Okay? Now the consequences of that is if you look at the equation, I hope I got it here, let's find out. Well, here you go. It turns out, I'll just tell you verbally because I have a suspicion it's not going to be on this one. No, it's not. Okay, I'll just tell it to you. In that acceleration equation, if you can change the rate of time flow and accelerate it, let's say by a factor of 500, the acceleration that you would calculate is now 1 over 500 squared smaller. 1 over 500 squared is 1 over 1/4 of a million. So it's 1/4 of a millionth of what you expected if you could accelerate your time flow aboard the ship at 500 times normal time flow rate. When you go into the right angle turn at 5,000 miles an hour and do it like that, you only experience 1/4 millionth of the acceleration that you would normally thought you would. In other words, you experience essentially a change of viewing port angle. Oh, let's look at this now. Okay? So this here I've drawn is a path of a UFO type thing that there's a good video of that was done down in Australia. One day this UFO flew into this town for just a little bit, went and each little vertex is a place where it stopped for just a little bit and then took off again. So it did this, and then, okay? Now this is totally insane and irrational when you're looking at it from our point of time flow rate and what we're doing. But imagine this ship is at 500 times normal time flow rate. Okay? What was it? It was actually a tour ship taking a look at primitive villages. And, oh, let's take a look at the sewer plant. You won't believe what they do over there. See? City Hall is really outrageous. Come on. And it goes to the schools. It goes to everything in town. And then, we're late for dinner. We got to go. Tour bus, got to get back. So it makes sense if you look at things in accelerated time flow. Let's say you got yourself an old Commodore computer and everybody's making fun of you, right? You got a God. You take your Commodore computer and you go into the accelerated time flow chamber, right? And now you just beat their pants off. That little old itty dinky processor now is doing 5 gigs. Oh, want more? Let's go to 20. Just up the crank, So you solve your computation speeding problem. Just take your computer into an accelerated time flow place. And now your problem is how to get enough information in there to keep it busy. Okay, now laser light beam formation. Well, we'll kind of more or less skip that. Just suffice it to say, if you can play around and control time, then you can create an environment where you can go in and do intricate things at one time scale level, and then you can take your results and transport it out into another time flow realm to give you precise precision, which you could not do in this realm. Tractor beams, treating them, using them, consequences. Okay, phase lock, plane polarized, overlapping laser beams, I'll show you what those are in a moment, can form a tractor beam for moving objects around. Phase lock, plane polarized, overlapping microwave beams can also form a tractor beam because they're really just the same thing, different frequency range. So this one set of parallel lines, solid dash, solid dash, solid dash, going this way, that's one light beam. And the other one doing the same thing going this way. And they're phase locked. In other words, they're both at the same frequency, and we're not changing. They're staying relatively the same phase as they lock together at this place here. Now this line here represents the surface of something that you want to grab onto and pull back that away. Okay? Well, you can do calculations, which I've done, and here's what I'll cut to the chase real quick. As long as this wavelength of light, or this frequency of light in these phase lock beams, is absorbed within 1/4 the wavelength, that's this distance right there, then this surface has a force on it that heads it that way. It's called a tractor beam. So as long as you can meet that condition, that most of the light is absorbed within 1/4 of a wavelength of the surface after it hits it, of this type of configuration, there's a net force back that way. That's a tractor beam. Now, you can do the same thing. You can imagine this is, instead of being light beams, it's microwave beams, phase locked. And if you've tuned it for water, or you've tuned it for fat, or you've tuned it for something you want, like on a cow, and you're flying over the pastures looking for the cow for the night, oh, a Guernsey, you know, and you swoop in, you put the tractor beam on, the poor cow goes, what the, and next thing you know, it's being lifted up into the ship. They do what they're going to do to this poor thing, and then they drop it off in the field and go on about their business. Or maybe it's Farmer Jones they want that night, and they're going to, you know, lift him up, take him up to the ship, put a hypno beam on him so he doesn't remember anything. Now, if you've got a tractor beam device, it's also a non-action reaction engine. So here's my tractor beam generation system. One beam, and I split it, beam split it, and then I sync it. They're phase locked, and I do raster lines like on a TV, and I keep repeating over and over and over. I do it very, very fast. Well, that plate feels a force on it from the tractor beam. If I bolt that plate to the wall of my ship and put this device pointing on it, I now have an engine. Ship heads off that way, being pulled. I put it down here and I use it for my hovering. You see, it's a non-action reaction engine. Oh, good, it's in this one. Well, some of the stuff got in. Anyway, let's talk about how to make gravity. How much time I have left? 4. Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, here we go. This is called a quadrupole because there's 4 of them. There's 4 poles. This is called an octopole because there's 8 of them. It's one quadrupole put on top of another quadrupole. And I show an axis of rotation. Now, I can't even read it. The screen's bent. I hope you guys can read it. I'll just tell you what it means. Okay. Now, if you take that octopole, which is now this guy, and the other 4 poles you can't see because they're hidden behind the ones on the top, right? That's our what do you call it? That's our octopole. And what am I doing with the octopole? I'm spinning it. I'm rotating it. Now, why do I want to do such a silly thing? Well, if I do that, the electric field that expends out from an octopole rotates with the octopole. So the octopole does one rotation. The field all around the room does one rotation. The field right outside the octopole here has a short distance to travel to make one rotation. The field of the octopole that's out at the end of the hall has to really haul to make it in one rotation. The field coming from the octopole that's 5 blocks from here, it has to really, really, really travel to make it around in one revolution. So it goes faster and faster and faster, the field, the further you get it from the octopole. Okay? Well, I had one of those experiences where reality was overtaken on me when one of those articles I was reading and stuff that wasn't there was there and then it wasn't there. And that article was on, what was it on? Rotating neutron stars, pulsars. And they did a full-blown field equation thing and tensors, the whole mess. Really complex crap. But the gist of it was this, what they told me. If you want to make gravity, what you do is you make yourself an octopole and you spin it. And when the octopole field out from the octopole reaches the speed of light trying to keep up with the octopole, it's rotating, at that distance, at that spin rate, that's gravity. That's it. Okay? So if I can make a nice little octopole and spin it like hell, a few billion times a second, then I can create a gravity field right around that octopole. If I can build an array of octopoles, I can then build a lot more gravity. But it's not real practical that way, so let's be practical. Here's a charge, and there's a metal plate, and this negative charge induces on the metal plate a positive charge. It swells up, gets more dense at the nearest distance, and goes back weaker as it goes away. And on the other side, there's a positive charge. So that's an imaginary charge. In other words, if the metal plate were to disappear, the force that the negative charge feels from a positive charge of the same magnitude at that twice its distance is the same as the force that this thing feels from a metal plate from the induced charge. It's just where it works out in electrostatics. But it's a very interesting thing to understand and know. Now imagine you took the charge and you moved it up this way a little bit. That distribution would move with it. You move it this way, it would move that way. If you moved it out, well, it would still stay there, but it'd get weaker because it's further away. If you move the charge in, it's still there, but now it gets much more intense because it's closer. So now imagine you take the charge and you do something like this. You rotate it, right? Well, the image charge on the plate will do a similar sort of jigsagging, really complex pattern. All right? And at the same time you're doing that, it's as though the force it feels as though there was a charge just like it of opposite charge at the distance it is from the plate on the other side. So for every time this thing does a circular dance, the imaginary image charge thing does a circular dance. Okay? Well, now imagine we do it with our octopole, again with 4 of the charges hidden behind the other charges. You know, so we're looking directly down on that cube, and so we can't see the ones that are out of sight. Now just look at one charge at a time. Each of those charges will have its image charge on the metal, right? I've got it frozen time right now. The positive charge will have its image charge. This negative charge will have its. That one. So that. And its image is that thing right there, which is what? Another octopole. Okay? Now, let's see what happens. We start rotating this thing slowly. Well, the image charge on the metal plate from each of these will slowly, they'll all add together and they'll all churn. It's one complex nightmare mess, and you don't want to try to visualize it. Just understand that, yeah, there'll be charges all over the place, and they'll be kind of, and that's the octopole image charge on the metal. And that field that comes from that pattern on the metal is the same field, that field out here in space from that charge that this thing induces, is the same as the field of a real octopole if that was a real octopole and this wasn't here. What it all boils down to is if I can figure out a way to make the charge pattern on the metal just like it would be if I had a real octopole rotating in the front, if I can make that rotating, that pattern that shows up then without this guy here, then I'm producing a field out here that's that guy's field. And what is that guy? That's a rotating octopole. And what happens when the rotating octopole field reaches the speed of light? Gravity. So I have a gravity field generator if I can just figure out a way to take a metal surface, or plasma surface, and make that funny charge configuration that's induced by having an octopole spinning out in front of it without the octopole. If I can figure out how to do that, I now have synthetic gravity. Neat, huh? Anybody here from Silicon Valley wants to take this project on? Big bucks. Okay. Now, here's a plate. This is a gravity plate. I'm on my starship and I'm tired of floating around. So I put these gravity panels in the floor. And they're made up of a fantastic array of little octopoles that are doing what we just talked about. And the gravity field is starts at about maybe an inch or two above the octopole. Because I got these guys really hauling a couple billion times a second rotating, and that's where the gravity collapse point occurs, let's say. So if I can put these panels down, I can walk around my ship at the gravity field I like. I can also take this panel and I can lean it up, bracket it up against the wall and turn it on and pull the wall towards the panel. It's an engine also. You see it? It's a non-action reaction engine. It's really great for hovering. You want to come into your craft and make no noise and just hover there and sit there? This is the sort of thing you want. What do we need to break the light barrier? A really big power plant, a non-action reaction engine, accelerated time flow rate around the ship, the starship. And again, back to that diagram. Okay, here, alien medical procedures and lack of infection. Question, when you read and hear about all those alien implant operations and or those other alien surgeries to fix a health problem, why do you not hear about infections problems coming from what would seem to be not very sterile or clean operating conditions and locations? Answer. The aliens use specific frequencies of ultrasound to destroy all viruses and microbes present. For example, in the 1920s and 30s, Dr. Royal Raymond Rife discovered that every species of virus and microbe he studied always had at least one frequency of ultrasound that killed it quickly and easily. And see this website. I'm advertising my website, guys. RifeEnergyMedicine.com and RifeVideos.com, which is not mine, for more real information on Rife-type discoveries. They were showing. And that particular day, in the RKO newsreel, they had a piece on the UFOs that were in Washington, D.C. They were hovering over the Capitol building. They stayed there all that weekend. And in this newsreel, they interviewed a Navy admiral and an Air Force general. And the reporter goes up to the admiral and says, "What do you think they are?" And he says, "They do not show up on our radar." And that's all he'll say. So then he goes to the Air Force general and says, "What do you think they are?" And he says, with a big shit grin on his face, he says, "Our radar is working fine and we see them." And that's all he'll say. You know, he's sticking it to the other service. And the reporter can't get anything more out of these two guys. But the cameraman's panning back up, showing you the objects, and going back down to the Capitol building in the background with the general and the admiral in the foreground. And that was the end of that piece, and they went on to the next part. And I'm thinking, oh, that's what I saw in the alleyway. It's those guys. Well, they stayed there all that weekend, made national news. It was talked about in the radio. Eventually, the president had to come out and talk about it. Yes, we know they're there. We know what they are. That's all he'd say. Truman. And then they flew out of town, and then they flew back in the next weekend and stayed 2 more days, and then they flew out of town and didn't come back officially anymore. That's when I think we made the treaty agreement with them. They coerced us into it, you know. You will recognize us, you know, we're going to stay up here. Anyway, disclosures already happened, but frankly, the population wanted to deny it.
Since 1995, over 26,000 international students from all walks of life joined the British investigators' training courses in anomalous phenomena within ufology, paranormal and supernatural, parapsychological study, anomalous phenomena, science, hypnotherapy, spiritualism, astrology, astronomy, cryptozoology, and many other areas. Our certified self-study courses will teach you how to assess, analyze, engage, formulate, document, and be cognizant of all types of phenomena, suitable for light workers and starseeds, curious personalities and inquisitive minds, skeptics alike and truth seekers. For more information, please visit www.stellaruniversity.com.
Well, I saw my first flying saucer when I was 4 and a half. Didn't know what it was. My mother took me to town to visit a friend of hers who lived in an old Victorian house, and she had rented a room. It was a boarding house. And she lived upstairs in the back overlooking an alleyway. So we went up there, knocked on the door. They started yakking, and they said to me, you know, go in the room, be a good boy, don't do nothing bad. And they left, went to the parlor to talk, because that's what the rules were. So as soon as they left, I saw a back open window on the room. So I went up to the window, and I said, oh boy, a chance to look out of the second story. I'd never done that before. So I hoisted myself up onto the windowsill, and I was balancing myself out the window, checking out what the world was like from the second story. About that time, I saw something out on my vision to the left, and I looked down to see what it was, and it was the damnedest thing. Turned out to be a disc. It was about 15 feet across. I can tell you now, then I wouldn't have been, you know, I can remember it. And it was flying edge on, just coasting down the alleyway, doing about a brisk walk with a person, about that speed. And the disc itself was rotating slowly, like about this, slowly. And it had a dome on it, but the dome wasn't rotating. And as it got real close to me, I got a very good look at it. It was as close as the front seat here in the front row, about that distance, maybe a little closer. And it was up at my elevation. It also needed a good washing. I thought to myself, they should wash this, whatever it is. It was all dingy and dirty. And it didn't make any noise. And it had this funny hazy glow around the edge of it. It was like a grayness in the air. It stood off about a foot off the edge, all the way out into maybe a foot or two into the disc itself. And it just went on by slowly, and I watched it go away, and it went out the alley, and that was that. And I didn't think any more of it. You know, when you're 4 and a half, everything's new. And I was from the country, lived on a ranch, this is in the big town of Merced I was in, you know. It's just something, you know, they have in Merced. Well, fast forward now about 3 years, and I'm now in a movie theater watching the RKO newsreel on Saturday before I get to watch the cartoons and Rocket Man or whatever, stick their heads in the sand, they moved on. So anyway, I've had all kinds of experiences in my life with UFO phenomenon. I've also had what I call associated experiences. It's not nothing like I'm watching The Craft, but I have things happen to me distorting my reality. It's real to me, but I know it's not real in the sense it's not regular reality. I'll try to explain. One day I was going to the mountains to try to talk to some people who had sighted a UFO near a town called Coulterville up in the Sierras in Central California. And I was about 2/3 or better of the way there, and it was in the August of '67. And I was coming down this long mountain grade into this flatness across the upper part of this little valley. And a really very large meadow, small valley, depends how you want to define things. And as I got down to the end of the grade and got into the flats, I noticed there was something out to my right across this little valley. And it was two identical objects that were the shape of footballs, ellipsoids, metallic looking, silver shiny. And they were orbiting each other's center of mass, and they were doing it over this big oak tree on the other side and the edge of this little valley. And I went, wow, that's them. You know, right there, that's them. And I got goose flesh and kept recycling the word wow. So I slowed my motorcycle way down, and I just kind of putted down this straight line road till the road made a right angle turn going the other way, and they were over that way. So at my closest approach, I was just about 1/8 of a mile from them. So we're real close, and I'm getting quite a good look at them. So I pull off the road there, and I take off my helmet, and I'm staring at these guys, and I'm thinking, wow, these are the guys I got questions for them. You know, I want to know where you're from, how you run your world, what's your power supply, what's the ships, how do you do it, you know, how do you break the light barrier? I had lots and lots of questions. And hey, there they are, go ask them. So I decided that's what I would do. I was going to drive over and talk with them if they would come down and land. Well, I knew this road very well because I went to the mountains all the time on my motorcycle having fun, you know. Anyway, right there where that road makes the turn, there's a dirt road that goes off, and about within 100 feet or so it goes up to a fence, barbed wire fence that has a break in it where there's a cattle guard. Keep the cattle from, you know, going out, but you can drive under the dirt road. Drive over, it makes a right angle turn, goes right down the fence line to where they're at. And I said, well, I'll just drive down that road, park there, and walk out in the field and say, come on, you know, land, let's talk. Well, I went to do that, and to my amazement, I couldn't find the road. The road was gone, but I know the road's there, but the road's gone. But I know the road's there, but the road's gone, you know. I know there's a cattle guard, but there's no cattle guard. There's a continuous fence, there's dead grass, there's no road. I'm going, does not compute. Then I talk to myself, I say, self, you must be really excited about this, and you're somehow misremembering. It must be just a little further down the road than you're remembering. You know, you tell yourself something. Or they tell you something to think. So I go down the road just a little bit, go up over a little rise, and drop down. There's a turn out there, and I turn out, and I stop there, and I have this conversation with myself. I won't bore you with all the details.